visit Lindsay over here, who is our hashtag hash modder. Hash modder.
It feels like it's computer code, but yeah.
Okay. He will be looking over everyone who are looking at our particular panel remotely. Our first panelist today is Dr. Yura Bhatt. She's a PhD and advocacy expert and trainer for online African American girls, especially adolescent and teen girls, and the people, communities and organizations who care about their ecological fitness on and offline. She offers digital media research, artistic training, literary skills, and educational resources that empower girls to resist the digital seduction of their content and value online. Her workshops invite girls to go beyond merely hanging out or messing around, empowering them to geek out with audio-visual technologies and participatory media. Our second panelist is Julia Boring. She is a PhD student at Princeton University in the Department of English, working on literatures, histories, and visual cultures of the Caribbean and Caribbean diaspora, with a particular interest in the afterlives of slavery and contemporary tourism. Originally from Toronto, Ontario, Julia holds a BA and an MA from the University of Toronto. Our third panelist is Louis-Philippe Raymer. He's from the Department of Anthropology at New York University. His research spans from linguistic anthropology to political and legal anthropology and focuses on the Caribbean, also South America and the territories connected by Dutch imperial expansion. Interests range from the democratic public spheres and social movements made possible by radio and social media to questions of imperialism, sovereignty, decolonization, and human rights in the offshore or overseas non-independent territories. Louis-Philippe also speaks several languages. My apologies if I pronounce this incorrectly. Papiamentu, Dutch, English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and a little Indonesian. And finally, our last panelist today is Nick Belcrew. He is of Irish, Danish, and French Métis descent. He is a cultural researcher of contemporary art and digital cultures. His research considers queer and indigenous artists, my apologies, working on the early web. He holds a BFA in drawing from the Alberta College of Art and Design and an MA in art history from Concordia University, where he is currently a PhD student and faculty member. He is the 2015 Jaroslavsky Foundation Fellow in Canadian Art History. His artworks and curated projects have been exhibited across Canada, Europe, and the Middle East. So without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to Yura and yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Black Culture. We have this tradition where we ask people to actually engage. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now let's see what's going on. I'd like to talk to you about my Bottom Lines project, and I would suggest you move forward. Low voices don't carry well in big spaces. Low sounding voices, low pitched voices don't carry well in big spaces. So the original title of my talk was about the context collapse of Ratchet. But I've altered that because I don't really want to talk about Ratchet. I want to talk to you about my project from a different lens. The Bottom Lines project, well, you'll become aware of what it is. I call it the Bottom Lines project because I've collected data on over 800 or 150 hours watched of twerking videos. So, first I want to dedicate this talk to Jamie Adedro-Moore. Jamie Adedro-Moore was one of the original members of the original twerk team in 2009 on YouTube. It led to the viral sensation in many ways of twerking particularly among African American Black girls and Latino girls. Twerking comes in all varieties on YouTube. It's called Perreo or Dembo. It's called Mapuka in the Ivory Coast, which is far older than twerking. Jamie Adedro-Moore was murdered in November at the age age of 24. In the news reports, she was only referred to as Betty Butt. That was her name online. For about a week, they never used her real name. And that's the context of the work that I do. That black girls' lives don't matter the same in the media and online. So, I know some of you are asking, what is Twitter? This is a meme that goes around the internet a lot. And I use it often, and usually evokes a lot of laughter. But twerking actually originated as a form in New Orleans in the late 1980s. Most of you know it perhaps because of Miley Cyrus and subsequent mega artists on YouTube or on Facebook who have been twerking to up their brand. The word is from to work, or to work the body, or to work something well. It comes out of both black gay culture and African American culture. Work it or working things is much older than twerking, but the term originated in New Orleans. So the Bottom Lines Project is about YouTube twerking and the context collapse of broadcasting while young, black, and female. How many of you don't understand the concept of context collapse? Does anybody not understand? So when you're online, and let's say you in particular are searching for twerking videos, and when you watch a black girl twerking, you come with a set of histories and ideas about black females who dance from their bedrooms, spaces that are primarily private and segregated still today. How many of you have ever been in a black girl's bedroom? So, not many. So imagine an 8-year-old twerking in their bedroom in a video in which you may have a history of thinking that that's not appropriate for a young girl, or it's not appropriate for girls to express their sexuality online. So you bring a set of histories that may be very different than the girl who's performing. That's the essence of context collapse. You bring a history, I bring a history, they collide, all of the people who comment, their histories collide, and a collapse of what it means to be in a particular context arises. It even arises when you get online to upload your video. I don't know who I'm making the video for, which is another layer of context collapse. So, I want to talk to you about online girls. They're like their counterparts, tethered to their technology. But I want to talk about the bedroom culture of this fandom that twerking occupies. For a lot of black girls, it's a safer space to be in public. I don't know if you're aware of some of the statistics about black girls. Black girls have been said in psychological studies to have a lot better self-esteem than their white counterparts. But they often have lower self-esteem about their hair texture not being straight enough, or their body being more developed than others. I love this quote by Martin Luther King: "A persistent schizophrenia leaves so many of us tragically divided against ourselves." They also are showing signs because of diet, because of endocrines, and from eating too much processed food, of reaching puberty at age 7 or 8. 25% of black girls show signs of breast and pubic hair development at a very young age compared to Asians, Hispanics, or whites. And I use this work to talk about identity formation and digital self-presentation for black girls, or for teens, network teens online in general. There's a kind of cognitive dissonance for all of us online. It's particularly risky for adolescents, especially in my data. I look at girls who are 13 to 17, or 13 to 16, really, and younger. So it's hard for them to understand that they don't own their own self-worth, and that how their identity is shaped is through their interactions with other people, not just the people they see in person, but the people who respond to their content online, which, if you've been on anything from YouTube to the Atlantic website, you know, is highly racialized, highly sexualized. What people talk about is very stigmatized. And the last piece of data about the life course of black girls with their if you look at black women today, black women 18 to 64 have a negative net worth or zero net worth, $5 to $100 in savings. So to put it in perspective, black women earn 1 cent of wealth for every $1 owned by black males, and a tiny fraction of a cent for every dollar owned by white women. So when girls upload content online, just like all of us, but particularly black girls who don't have a lot of access to, well, they have access to the technology, they have access to YouTube, they have access to lots of things, but they don't have the digital media literacy of what's called geeking out. They don't edit their videos, they shoot and upload, generally speaking. And it's true of most youth, but it's particularly harmful to the most vulnerable ethnic and gender groups online. So I wanted to play with the title. This is the 150th anniversary of the 13th Amendment. It was ratified in December of 1865. And it said that you, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, shall exist within the United States. I hope that applies online, because I assert that black girls are their voluntary uploads are being exploited by a lot of people in the name of profit. So the data collection I have is 800 twerking videos. It's collected collaboratively with my undergraduate students over the last year. So about 30 to 40 students have collected 10 to 40 videos each based on their own searches. The data is 13 to 17-year-olds and as young as 8. You might ask, how do we know that? Since June of 2013, YouTube does not make that information public. It used to be public, that you could see the age, nation, and sex of whoever a subscriber was. So we have to use our eyes, just like most people do, to guess from their surroundings what their bedrooms look like. If you see a Hello Kitty backpack, it gives you some indication of what age range you're dealing with. There are racial and gender disparities in the data set based on what students saw when they were searching for content, or what I see when I'm searching for content. I'm going to show you a little example of that. And there's the issue about the title refers to both the monetary bottom lines and the cultural bottom lines of being online as a black female, young girl. And I can talk to you about digital sex trafficking if I have time. So Dana Boyd has said that young people quickly learn that which scales, that which spreads, tends to be that which is most embarrassing, humiliating, grotesque, or sexual. Twerking counts on most of those. So this is, if you do I can't even say anymore, if you do a search. I don't know what your algorithm brings up, but if I do a search for black girls twerk teams, this is for a search that I did in November, what came up was 2 to 3 pages, and this was consistent throughout the collection of data among my students, that if you search for black girls, because people tag their content as black girls, you will get white women. So for this particular search, 2 pages of white women, no girls, except for one video that reads white girl twerk team number 4, which signals to you right away that it's probably not the girl's content. This is the video. It's 2 girls, which my students helped me realize something about the age. You can't see here, but they both have the same little ribbon on their hair, which they said they probably are on the same cheerleading team. This video has 6 million views today. When I first saw it, it had 5 million views in November. In my entire data set of 800 videos, I have none of them is over, randomly selected by students, none of them are over 1 million views. And yet, twerking began in the black community. In fact, the earliest twerking videos in the YouTube archive are by black girls, dating back to as early as 2006. That has a lot to do with 2 things. The start of YouTube, the launch of YouTube in 2005, 10 years ago, and I assert Hurricane Katrina. So New Orleans, Katrina happened in December of 2005. And then many of them lost all of their material culture around their music. So one of the ways that they shared the culture was this new phenomenon that was online. You could share video very easily all of a sudden. So you could record sound audio from a record and put it in a video, so you could share it with people who are dispersed at all points in the United States, from Maine to Portland to Lower California to Florida. So this is really important. This video is also on a male subscribers channel, as is 40% of the data set. 60% of this data set is marked age restricted, which means that if they look like they're over 13, that content will remain online. This has horrible repercussions for the future identities offline of these Black women in the future. Because what will happen is that people will search, especially given face recognition just on Facebook, even if they don't identify themselves, they may be identifying, and they'll never know why they didn't get an interview or a job or didn't get into school. So it's like polluted the sphere of their movement in the public in a way that most people don't realize. And one of the comments here, so the digital shadows of people's comments about them also will shape their digital net worth and their online network. So when Black girls twerk, it says, you guys say it's gross, nasty. When white girls twerk, it's sexy, cute. What the fuck? This is I just told you about this, I'll skip it. This is I'm going to show you one brief 18 seconds of an 8-year-old's twerking video that I found about a month or so ago. I've changed her name. My students and I are working to figure out what the ethical issues of presenting data on YouTube that's public for girls who are underage who don't understand what publicity means. Network publicity is not something they fully comprehend. Not even 12-year-olds and not even this 50-year-old. So one of the things that's really important is to change their identity. So I've taken her name off because I actually think this is her real video. Her name was on the video. We have to do a little sleuthing to figure out if these videos actually belong to the people there, because sometimes people mask themselves as others. There's all kinds of things that happen in the video, including doxing, that also reveals their identity. People put their Instagram name and their Facebook name, and the men and boys put their phone numbers underneath the content, almost like they're call girls that young girls might actually call them. So we call this young girl Ruby. I named her after the first African American to integrate the public schools in New Orleans, Ruby Nell Bridges.
Action.
But you can't hear it. So this is her brother taking the video. He sounds like he's younger than her. She names the video. And I had to think about what would have, at first I thought, an 8-year-old wouldn't do this. Name their video an 8-year-old twerking. And then I lived with 2 8-year-olds, and all they do is say, I'm 8, I'm 8, I'm 8, I'm 8. And as Dana Boyd pointed out, they quickly learn what scales. They watch videos. They know that the best videos people identify. It's broadcast yourself. So you need to mark yourself somehow. This, underneath this is one of many comments below her video. When I first found the video, it had 600 views. It has over, well over 1,000, going on 2,000 views now. The comments often are like this. It's not many comments. Wow, she's good. She's cute and thick, and she wasn't scared to show her skills. She just had on too many clothes. Let her twerk in her panties so she can really show off. If you kick me, kick is an app that some of you are familiar with, so we can talk. So what's happening is that Black girls are being turned into call girls. They're being treated like they're porn stars, free says objectifying. Under the white girls video that I showed you, the comments are generally not of that nature. They're mostly, white girls can twerk. Why are white girls so upset that white girls are twerking? It's almost about racializing things. So to wrap up, one of the things that I've discovered from doing this work is why Miley Cyrus's twerking isn't authentic in the eyes of Black people. It's not because of how she twerks. The gesture itself is a part of what's called bounce music in New Orleans. They don't call it twerking, they call it bounce. But the problem is she doesn't do something that I write about in my research in my first book. It's called kinetic orality. So you tell stories with your body. It's like miming the narrative of a rap song with your body or the beats with your body. And you don't just keep a steady pulse through a song, which is what Miley is. So there was no tail in her tail, pardon the pun. She didn't tell any stories with what she was doing. So when people say that Miley Cyrus doesn't know how to twerk, it's not racial. It's actually cultural. It actually has to do with the way musical blackness is culturally constructed as a narrative. So this is just an introduction into the work. I look forward to your questions. What I really would love is I'm looking for collaborators for the videos that we create in Students Blog, but we also do PSAs. But I'm hoping to do some creative work with this, where I take, YouTube has been uploading new music, age-appropriate children's music, and I'd like to set some of the texts to that music, as well as find a way to broadcast the phone numbers of the males. And then I'm also asking myself, if I'm going to protect Ruby's identity, do I protect those males' identity? Do they know any better? So thank you. We have to wait for us to look to see the fingers. I always miss the fingers.
So as a kind of a framing device, since I'm going to be talking about something visual, but not necessarily reading all the images, I just have a few slides here that I'll let sort of flow through the course of my discussion. To give you a fuller idea of the kinds of things you might see on what I'm calling the TripAdvisor archive as it grows and reorders itself. And one of the broader questions that I'm trying to ask through the accessible model of the tourist, of the mass tourist, is who or what is the tourist? And more generally, what are the tourist's desires? It seems to me more and more that we're moving towards becoming tourists in our everyday lives via technologies and techniques of documentation, for which the web obviously becomes crucial. So how does the tourist frame the world, past and present, full of traumatic histories and traumatic becomings, according to these desires? Pleasant staff, great food, great view of the ocean, nice beach, a great place to relax, unwind, and enjoy the island, writes Josie Bell 660 of Burbank, California, about her 2014 Jamaican holiday. This 4.5-star rated review, titled Relax and Enjoy, offers an instantly familiar, immersive catalog of Caribbean leisure, evoking a paradise of contemplation, stolen out of time, and voided of any distinguishing spatial markers, if not for its ordered position on TripAdvisor's Greenwood Greathouse profile page. It would be virtually impossible to place such description in the context of a Jamaican plantation.
In her depiction of this blank, originary scene, one imagines Josie Bell, 660, strolling and reclining on the ground slavery built, effacing hundreds of years of history with yawn. And it is precisely this memorialization of erasure, which takes place at the place of the originary and structural breakdown of said memory, that draws me to Jacques Derrida's haunted and haunting concept of the archive. With imperfect fidelity to this proliferating concept, I have sought to investigate the meaning of archive for the site of the Plantation Museum, as reinstituted, contaminated, destroyed, and forgotten by digital iterations of the Tourism View archive. As Walter Benjamin has written, quote, "There is no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism," close quote. And by the light of this burning passion to read and to reckon with the archives of human history, I aim to explore TripAdvisor, the world's largest travel community network, as a living document of globalized civilization in the digital era that is most certainly, at the same time, a living testament to barbarism's more humane versions. To read the tourist archive symptomatically, to read between the lines of its seemingly apolitical, ahistorical gestures, to discover what the text cannot say, is to unmask the simultaneous insouciance, anxiety, banality, and violence of systemic historical erasure under global capitalism. If for Derrida, quote, "the archivization produces as much as it records the event," close quote, then TripAdvisor also produces the illusory non-event of the Caribbean vacation, sunny, sandy respite from labor, as much as it records it. Observing the ongoing crisis of citizenship, of racialized policing and violence, Cydia Harvey writes, in her journey along the Atlantic slave route, quote, "I too live in the time of slavery, by which I mean I am living in the future created by it. I am drawn to this account of painful historical continuity as a model for reading TripAdvisor's Caribbean archive, the future of an archive that was created first by the plantation domiciliation, that which for Derrida is the home of those citizens who thus held and signified political power and were considered to possess the right to make or represent law. And secondly, by the concept of the Plantation Museum, which then converted these private properties into objects of the semi-public domain. This museum shelters and preserves the plantation configuration, masters and slaves, slave huts, and grape houses, while reenacting new discursive and imaginative formations and configurations of the local. If travel classified as cultural heritage tourism, thought to be the fastest growing sector of the leisure industry, is also considered the lesser of evils in the empire of mass tourism, is perhaps because it concerns itself with an ethics of testimony and truth. The ideal cultural heritage tourist desires to circumvent the crude banalities of the collective tourist gaze to become a singular witness to people, place, and history. But what's at stake in these economies of witnessing and testifying? Concerning the particular touristic landscape of Jamaica, one of the leading standardized all-inclusive vacation destinations in the world, and thus one of the most frequently reviewed, who draws or what draws tourists to continue to write? There are already almost 900 reviews of the Rose Hall Grape House, for example, with the latest entries posted as recently as yesterday. In addition to the widespread social media-born desire to narrate and document each daily encounter himself, there appears a pervasive sense of community service present in the virtual archive of Caribbean culture. That is, there is a potentially meaningful sense of obligation drawn from the generative desire to help a group of similarly minded pleasure seekers locate better bargains and smoother transactions, thus reducing unnecessary friction with locals and service staff. So much of a contributor's credibility in forums such as TripAdvisor has less to do with sharing memorable moments and exceedingly more to do with overcoming obstacles and shortcomings. This is the temporary domicile and legacy of adventurers who overcome mosquito bites, uncomfortably long car rides, sandal blisters, delayed lunches, underwhelming service, overpriced souvenirs, aggressive sales tactics, crowds, and even boredom. This is the exemplary archive of failed witnesses. The sandwiches were set out on a tray, not covered at all, and and no ice underneath to keep them cold. Laments, loves dog Luffy, of her disappointing high tea lunch at the Good Hope Great House. Qualifying her dismay, she further glosses the particular conditions of the scene, writing, "Keep in mind this is a patio, semi-enclosed area exposed to bugs and heat. The sandwich fillings were not cold, and everyone on our tour was afraid to eat them, so we didn't." Having made this trip from Columbus, Ohio to enjoy the exotic foods of Caribbean hospitality, she adds, confirming resolutely, quote, "The cookies were nothing to write home about. I ate very little, as nothing was covered, and I was unsure how long they had been sitting there among the flies." Close quote. So this grievance, however facile, reflects many social, historical, and political surfaces upon which it is constituted. And I'm drawn to the TripAdvisor review in that it so often shifts on a whim between ennui and exasperation, between delight and paranoia, steeped in fantasy but bereft of imagination, and couched in language so dramatically repetitious that it becomes virtually unthinkable. Thus, it occurs to me that this particular review, when read in light of the archive as inextricably linked to psychoanalysis, bears compelling traces of archival sickness. The abjection and disgust present in this dismal annotation of mediocre cookies and untouched sandwiches makes the spoils of the afternoon into objects of mourning and regret, inadvertently drawing attention to the manifold waste produced by the tourism industry. The evocative phrase, "sitting there among the flies," suggests the peripheral but perceptible presence of death, the specter of an accumulated rottenness beneath this seemingly quotidian reenactment of planters' custom. Moreover, this festering remainder in the tourist stay in the life account would appear to reveal, if unconsciously, for but a fraction of a moment, the haunting of what Achille Mbembe calls the death in life existence of the plantation slave. Liberated from time and labor in tourist-designated enclaves, the callous reproaches of the TripAdvisor review triumphantly claims the capitalist privileges of global citizenship, removed from homebound responsibilities, and yet there is almost always something wrong, something very particular object, some very particular object of nothing, indeed, to write home about. For Edouard Glissant, writing of the Nottoway Plantation in Louisiana, quote, "Here memory is selective, rid of the whip of slavery," close quote. The function, then, of the TripAdvisor archive is thus to preserve and proliferate this selective memorialization process, reinscribing the spaces now supposedly rid of the whip of slavery with the whiff of half-spoiled tea sandwiches and disappointment. The exclusionary techniques and principles of the TripAdvisor archive never successfully withdraw from the rooted traumas of history. Rather, this vernacular parasitic criticism is a product and reagent of existing plantation imaginaries that invites the ruling class of tourists to perceive excess and want as typical, and destitution as a source of pleasure and denial. Born in 2000, which seems a long time ago now, TripAdvisor is a relatively new platform of the tourist imaginary, but cannot escape the hauntings of the imperial logics of territorialization that assemble its shape. James Baldwin observes, in William Faulkner's writings of the Southern United States, the failed attempt to redeem, without bloodshed, the old order of the Southern plantation, and to, quote, "exercise a history, which is also a curse." And I perceive this design, this practice of failed exorcism, alive and functioning well within the Rose Hall Great House Ghost Tour. Here, local workers are employed to appear in costume, powder their faces, and roam the grounds of the plantation as ghosts of former slaves. As the tourist hunts through the archive for its most titillating objects, archive fever takes hold in the compulsive, repetitive, nostalgic, and importantly, privileged desire to be haunted. This powerful desire is energetically displayed in a review by Los Angeles-based contributor Kwang Sears, who, in seeking to enrapture her audience in the sinister atmosphere of her family's visit to Rose Hall in 2012, begins by depicting the tour guide's uniform of black t-shirt and pants, which eerily blend into a dark, almost black complexion in the pitch dark foyer of the house, suggesting that the tourist gaze perhaps functions best in the dark. The anxiety of racial difference is memorialized as an authenticating special effect, perhaps greater than the actual performance of the costumed slaves. Observing a range of responses to the reenactments crafted to suit the automatized, spectacle-hungry tourist gaze, for other TripAdvisor critics, the disappointment of not being haunted well or properly scared subverts the potentially emancipatory ethics of haunting and mourning, and further conscripts the project of historical representation to the Ministry of Hospitality. So by this ruling logic, all spaces should be hospitable to the tourist, even the darkest, most haunted places in the world, in which case they ought to be hospitably inhospitable. This perverse desire to make hospitable those historically inhospitable places is naturalized by the absorbent mandate of tourism and finds its reverse structure in the making of spaces historically hospitable to the local community inhospitable. Hospitality becomes a force of law that rules the local, but does not mutually protect or profit him. As resort and cruise developments expand, displacing local industry, schools, and residences, prohibiting local entry into its fortified structures, the lives of the people native to these towns and cities are made not only inhospitable to them, but in many cases, uninhabitable. So, TripAdvisor is troubling in many ways, and I use this word deliberately to illustrate its troubling likeness to Derrida's already, quote, more troubled and more troubling reading of the word archive. And it would be easy to categorize the feverish proliferations of TripAdvisor by way of history's, quote, detestable revisionisms, but I want to suggest something perhaps even more troubling. I want to suggest that within the expansively compulsive, repetitive, and nostalgic desire for the archive, amidst the deep anxieties of competing archival principles and methods, there is a tangible interface between historically dominant scholastic disciplines of archive labor and the unabashedly capitalist, corporately sponsored platform of TripAdvisor. Reconstituted then in the idiomatic language of the cultural heritage tourist, this desperate desire to be legitimated by an illusionary authority, that which lies in the power to say, I was there, I saw it with my own eyes, is both exasperated and cured of its obsession by the dispersed, irresolute archivization techniques of today's online movie culture. Entering the slave dungeon of the Cape Coast Castle, Cydia Hartman writes, I too was a failed witness. Her archive fever is self-diagnosed, consigning itself to the mourning of echoes and traces, perhaps seeking no cure. The Plantation Archive has many authors, afterlives, contagions, and symptoms. I have attempted to diagnose the overexposed but underexamined symptoms of its digital iterations, but what of my own? This occurs to me as I reflect upon my visit to Greenwood Great House in the spring of 2014, when I too had been a tourist, however critical, however polite. I left inspired to write of the spidery veins of light coming through the trees, entangling in a swarm of mosquitoes and palm fronds, of the black iron gates and the rotting bell, buried in the weeds. I too left captivated by the lustrous pinks of the hibiscus, by the hissing of insects and the smell of heat-charred grass, and the agonizing view from the crumbling hilltop, where indeed you can watch ships moored or smarting along the sea surface. I have seen the bedroom, where each night I am told by my guide the current owners step lightly over the worn velvet ropes of the museum, slide into bed, and fall asleep in the archive that slavery built. I have found no kinship, no community in the archive of other tourists, but by my very desire to see and to touch and to document, by my very decision to enter, and thus to be haunted, I too have expected hospitality, and I too have failed. Thank you.
All the time to build present to you today asks how the Caribbean can serve as a site to think and rethink utopian and dystopian tendencies that shape much of our understandings of network communications technologies today. We'll present to you 3 moments from the ethnographic field research I conducted between 2012 and 2013 in Curacao. And these 3 moments are the Facebook demon and 2 examples here of online carnivores. And I'll explain what those are. And then the one at the top right is the trickster prostitute. Explain that. Taken together, these represent aspects of what I referred to in the title of this talk, Caribbean Visions of Digital Dystopia. I was ambivalent about the utopia dystopia, but I'll explain a little bit about it in this talk. With that, I mean ways of expressing and narrating the utopian and dystopian possibilities of communications technologies that emerge out of Caribbean historical memory of and resistance to slavery and imperialism. And these ways of expressing and narrating draw from the resources and backgrounds of its culturally diverse populations. I use these 3 examples to do what anthropologists, media studies scholars, and other critics have sought to do, which is to rethink technological determinism that undergirds much of the popular utopian narratives about the web and network technologies and its attendant emancipatory political possibilities. Some of you might recognize this as the moment, one of the moments in 2001 Space Odyssey when Monolith comes in and magically makes people progress towards humanity, right? And it's quite interesting to notice that many people have photoshopped and replaced the Monolith with an iPhone, so you already get a sense of like how we tend to think of technologies as these reified things that drop in and that cause all of these social transformations in a predictable and recognizable way. So what I'm going to do in this talk is work against that using the kinds of anthropological techniques that and methods that I have. So the next slide. So before getting into the trickster prostitutes and the Facebook demons of Curacao, I'm going to give you some background about the Caribbean, and that is important. So the Caribbean is the ground zero of European imperialism and colonization of the Americas. Laboratories of modernity is now the phrase to describe the region, for the Caribbean was the testing ground of many social, economic, and political arrangements that we think of as modern today. I say this to make clear that the theorization of the web as a Western technology entering into a putatively non-Western place has only limited empirical purchase in the Caribbean, both historically and in the present. The Caribbean archipelago has hosted authorities that support the functioning of global networks of trade and communication. Despite being at the center of these developments, nevertheless, Caribbean societies remain distinct from European and North American societies, both on the ground and in our imagination. This is not only due to their geographies, small islands chained between 2 large landmasses, but also because of their particular history of early incorporation into an incipient local economic, cultural, and political system. The ICT infrastructures we see in the Caribbean today are the physical manifestation of that long history of Caribbean integration into global circuits of trade and economy. So this is a telegraph cable from 1901, and I'm going to, next slide. In the past, these islands were sugar plantation, garrisons, entrepot, smuggling ports that connected American, African, and European markets. Presently, some of these islands host offshore finance hubs and other small centers, free trade zones, and increasingly server farms, or all of the above. As a result, these are islands that have ICT infrastructure that vast outstrip local consumer demand. So if you, for example, observe some of the small Virgin Islands there, you can see how many undersea fiber optic cables they have that far exceeds the needs of its like 20,000 or so, 30,000 or so inhabitants. Right? So it's clearly not built for just the local population alone. However, These infrastructures have enabled the local populations to rapidly adopt internet and other new technologies. So you can see here internet penetration at a scale, at a rate that pretty much mirrors, or in some cases even exceeds the United States. And the next slide. And here mobile technology penetrations, and you see the Cayman Islands, where many corporations and some politicians leave their assets offshore, exceeding rates up to 180 mobile lines per 100 persons, so much higher than the United States. Among this group of small Caribbean island societies with highly developed ICT infrastructures and rapid adoption rates of mobile and internet is Curacao, an island population of 150,000 located in the Caribbean Sea near Venezuela, as you can see on the slide there. Its highly developed ICT infrastructure is both a tracer of its political relationship with the Netherlands as an autonomous jurisdiction under their sovereignty, and of its economic structure. In former times, a free port, a transshipment hub for the transatlantic slave trade, now Curacao has an economy that relies on logistics, offshore finance, and the refining and transshipment of Venezuelan oil. Next slide to show the refinery. And then another slide showing the ship. This is a Russian spy ship. Leaving Curaçao's harbor, to give you a sense also how the place looks like, and that this is the main city of Curaçao and Willemstad, and the harbor is right in the middle of it. Next slide. So these activities attract and depend on communications infrastructure. Facebook penetration, by the latest estimates, is around 60% on the island, although this estimation is probably too low because the location settings of Facebook do not recognize Curacao as a country. I'm briefly going to show a slide, next slide, of a petition by Curaçaoans to, they're basically asking, please replace the old name Netherlands Antilles with a new country, Curaçao, right? So, and that still hasn't happened. That's like last check. Right. And next slide, please. So despite this widespread interconnectivity and use of mobile technology and the internet, inhabitants of Curacao maintain distinct spaces and venues for public expression through the use of language. And that's, here you can see an internet meme document. So here's some details that I can't go into because I don't have enough time. Papiamento is a creole that emerges out of contact between Spanish and Portuguese and the Dutch language and the populations that speak these languages. The language combines grammatical elements from West African languages and Spanish Portuguese, and also to a lesser extent English. It's widely used in the media and widely used in social media as well. Next slide. Now I will get into it. So towards the end of my time in Curacao, an older gentleman, I refer to him as Walter, frowned when I told him that I was interested in how political discourse in the democratic public sphere, how these are being affected after Curacao transitioned into its new autonomous status in 2010. This too entangled with corporate interests, he said, of social media. What we have on Curacao is governance by network. Walter was not alone, after all. News of the NSA leaks and the US Embassy cables had also reached Curacao and became popular discussion topics in the many talk shows, political talk radio shows on the island. Curacao has 25 radio stations as of time, so there's something going on there as well. I can't get into a few more questions about it later if I can. In these debates, the word network took on a meaning that barely resembles the utopian narratives of democratization popularized after occupying the Arab Spring. Instead, the network became a productive metaphor in Curacao to speculate about hidden transnational collusions between local politicians and multinational corporations, the state, and the criminal underworld. Walter was very pessimistic about the democratic possibilities of network media. He told me, I need to situate the social media sites within other networks that may exceed what is visible online. And I need to investigate who owns what, who designs, and who profits. Next slide. This critical perspective of governance by network was made concrete by a carnival costume I saw during the Curacao Carnival of 2013, where a Donald Duck costume is, once I pointed out, now you can tell it's a Donald Duck costume, right? Was repurposed into that of the Facebook Demon, a menacing eyeless mask that features all the iconic signs of Facebook's design. The like button, the comment button, the notification button, that characteristic blue color, coupled paired with the whip that would menacingly be cracked at the feet of bystanders whose attention was caught by their smartphones and not the carnival progression passing by. The Facebook Demon whips the ground in front of everyone, paying too much attention to their mobile phones as if to snap the attention of the spectators back to face-to-face co-presence. I grabbed my mobile phone to snap a picture of it, and the Facebook Demon whipped the ground beneath my feet. This is just about that was going to happen. It's getting ready to whip me. All right. So I'm glad you're all laughing because I think we're understanding the Carnival spirit of this right here. Right. Carnival in the Caribbean, a fusion of elements of medieval European, African, and Asian cultures, has long been a socially sanctioned venue for the expression of social critique, making the Carnivalesque genres of performance and narrative associated with this activity the preferred style for the delivery of said critique. This Facebook Demon engages these traditional forms even as it takes on new subject matter. By making Facebook into the grotesque demon, the wearer of the costume makes a satirical commentary on the site while remaining anonymous. The Facebook Demon cracks his whip to pull spectators away from their online devices and back to the carnival procession taking place, drawing attention to how social networks draw and capture our attention. The use of the whip, an echo of the memory of slavery, subtly reminds spectators to beware of social networks as they come to command attention and use that attention to make a profit. Next slide. Like Carnival, online social networks also provide opportunities for wearing costumes, donning masks, and anonymous social critique. The use of Facebook among community speakers has taken in these playful carnivalesque characteristics online. It is this quality that I call online carnivalesque. One of the features is the adoption of this carnivalesque, is the adoption of alter ego. I show one of them here. Instead of using real names written in passports and identity documents, these Facebook users craft carnivalesque, outlandish egos for themselves, online equivalents of carnival costumes. One of these carnival costumes is a trickster prostitute, one of the images I'm showing here. And these take stereotypical images and speech styles associated with prostitution in Curacao, and rework them into new versions of the trickster narratives prevalent in Caribbean folklore. They cast the stereotypical prostitute in the role of a trickster, an underdog that mocks authority and exposes the time from fool it really is. By attacking online, the politician's claims to moral supremacy from the most subaltern position imaginable in Curacao society. This online profile subtly criticizes your Curacao ideas about morality and social hierarchy. The use of online alter egos in particular, the use of online alter egos in particular indicate that Curacao Facebook users have refused the imperative to make their online identities fixable and legible in ways that Facebook's authentic name policies would prefer. Their refusal to restrict their online self-expressions in accordance to Facebook policies are even more poignant since Facebook currently does not support Curaçao's identifying their place-bound identities as such. Now I'll conclude. So together, the Facebook Demon, the online carnivalesque, and the trickster prostitute illustrate the main point I wish to make, that upon entry into the online, users are taking their online ways of thinking and making sense of the world, communicating and interacting with them. From the Facebook Demon Carnival costume that critique how social media's sites make profit by capturing user attention, to the Carnivalesque online alter egos, anonymous personas that draw on existing offline forms of political satire, these expressions illustrate how people in Curacao draw from their cultural repertoires to understand the utopian and dystopian possibilities of technology.
But in fact, Native peoples have always been technological, and furthermore have been active participants in digital culture since its foundation, despite our apparent invisibility in its history. And so, one level of research that I'm doing asks, where are all the Indians online? And yet another shows that we were always there. So from the role, for example, of Navajo women weavers involved in the production of really integrated circuits, as Lisa Nakamura is researching right now, to forces that influenced both the 1960s countercultures and cybernetics, such as in Stuart Brand's Back to the Land communitarian networks, which included indigenous voices in its hippie and virtual communities. As Native peoples, we've also handled digital networks in powerful ways, both in Indian country and within Native diasporas. Okay? So for example, there are some remarkable histories of early bulletin board systems and listserv in the 70s and 80s. And since that time, of course, a great deal of work has been accomplished on the web for local heritage initiatives, language repositories, commercial enterprises, and artistic expression. And here I'm showing one image from CyberPower, was among the earliest of NetArt platforms in digital. And so the web, of course, has also played a big role in indigenous activist networks. The well-known Zapatista uprisings in the mid-90s, in which the Electronic Disturbance Theater produced these large-scale distributed denial of service attacks against the Mexican and U.S. government domains, under the current Hydro-Reform movement, which is a massive international networked revolt and affirmation of native cultures. So such self-actualizing initiatives of indigenous peoples creating media content endeavor to stake new claims on the territory of the web, right? Rectifying a legacy of non-native misrepresentation of native content and developing new forms of cultural expression in a new media that is itself tied to colonial powers. So as the pre-Métis great filmmaker Loretta Todd asked regarding Robert Flaherty's 1922 docudrama Nanook of the North, she says, quote, "Imagine how things would be different if he had given Nanook the gift." And so expressly for many indigenous cultural actors on the early web, this work was a direct effort to thwart the reiteration of European technological conquest. That is, they actively sought to avoid the repetition of an earlier chapter in colonialism, in which domination was carried out in part through communications technologies. From mapping and printing technologies to communications tools like Louis Shoda's 19th century telegraphic exchange, which controlled the flow of information for coding powers. And so they wanted to become, as the technologist Randy Roth said in the mid-90s, roadkill on the information superhighway. And so their efforts in producing these self-affirming cultural works are what the Coast Salish artist Ifwe Lipton recognized as the use of, quote, employing technology that in the past had been used against Native people. And this is this really groundbreaking virtual reality artwork. It was actually the first VR work to be shown in both North America and Europe in museum spaces. And it's simulating a long haul syndrome. And so in many of these varied uses of digital media, we can see a concerted effort to make room for indigenous presence in these new virtual spaces. And that's accomplished an initiative of the Mexican Chicano artist Guillermo Gomez Peña affirmed to, quote, remap the hegemonic cartography of cyberspace. And so on the one hand, cyberspace can be shown to stem from these Eurocentric forces, and on the other, it has simultaneously allowed for a kind of countercultural indigenous expression. So cyberspace, this rather corny, 90s flavored catchword, was of course one of a myriad of earlier spatial metaphors of digital networks. So metaphors of the internet as information superhighway and as electronic frontier, and then also in applications like Explorer, Conqueror, Navigator, have often carried a thoroughly imperial flavor that accompanied digital technology's colonial expansion across the planet. And the spread of information and communications technologies to diverse communities necessitated adapting to so-called global technological culture. So demonstrably, this media imperialism entails the expansion of central ideological powers to exact control over those given technologies, access to these technologies. And I'm thinking of what's the thing in America, you have the computer for every child. One laptop for every child. And so digital technologies structurally rely upon the tools and languages of the imperial Euro-West. Indeed, over half of all live websites have their written content in English, never mind the dominance of English in all of computer science, where the language and then more generally the Latin alphabet make up nearly every programming language, communication protocol, and operating system. With the spread of linguistic and technical protocols is a corollary imposition of cultural standards. As the sociologist Todd Gitlin has said, if there is a globalized village, it speaks American. It wears jeans, drinks Coke, eats at the Golden Arches, walks on swoosh shoes, recognizes Mickey Mouse, Bart Simpson, R2-D2, and wrote that in 2001. And it's worth mentioning, I think, that actually many native languages, among others, would perhaps be more conducive to cleaner programming languages, such as the Cree language Nikioman, which is verb-based, it's modular, and it's generally less tricky than English. But aside from these more furtive ideological structures that shape the groundwork for cyberspace, we can point to the more apparent unequal distribution of material conditions, of course, that shape access to these technologies. In brief, the global digital communications network has been structured favorably for those within the West and more developed world. But importantly, this digital divide is not structured along national borders, as this graphic shows, but along cultural and political biases. So, as example, native reservations in North America, and perhaps elsewhere, I'm not sure, they've often been omitted from communications networks. And so reasons for this range from systemic inequalities at the level of governmental support for technological infrastructure to geopolitical reasons. Indian reservations were often located on remote territories, often slated for prisons historically, and so hence they're often far from technological infrastructures. But despite this, to reiterate, native cultural actors have accomplished tremendous occupations of the terra nullius of the web, both for autonomous political manifestations and indeed creative contributions to digital culture itself. And so I'm wanting to suggest that these cultural precedents belong in critical discussions about current digital communications, specifically as ways of exploring the colonial imperial ethos of network culture. So where Marshall McLuhan's global village predicted a tribal, inclusive global community, we see on the net, in fact, the development of exclusive links held up by various digital divides and insular discourses that fend off contributions of the other. As Lisa Nakamura has said, quote, "We should remember it was the villagers that chased Frankenstein out of the village. Villages have often been xenophobic places where there's a narrow range of identities that are tolerated." And Loretta Donegan gives insight into the so-called tribal nature of this global village and suggests that if it actually resembled tribal societies, it would directly, quote, "cause the breakdown of central authorities, renew communal values, and possess a concern for the future generation." And so in some of these models of indigenous online cultures, I think we can spot alternatives to common, corporatized, controlled spaces of the web. Okay. So this research is an attempt to show on the one hand how the web is not politically neutral, of course, how technologies are structured along cultural biases, and on the other hand, how both these ideological forms and the actual technologies themselves are changeable, are themselves sites of conflict and contestation that I hope might benefit from these examples in indigenous networks, which are at odds with the dominant ethos, I think, of network culture and its utilizing and repurposing its technologies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we can do the massive round of applause at this point. Okay, so before I open up the floor for if anyone's got any questions and comments, I was actually wondering if Marley can give us some of what people are tweeting about. Here.
Sure. Hi. Okay, so internet's being wonky, so I'm reciting this half from memory. I'm also trying to remove myself from this last paper since I've got a lot of personal feelings about what's going on there. In good ways, like it's great. But I think one of the interesting things that's been happening, and maybe this is because like I've been reading a lot recently in concepts of the imagination, is that each of these papers seems to, and I think based on what people have been retweeting or favoriting, it's always been language of like, for example, Kira's paper, imagining a black girl's room, or a bedroom, or trying to, think about indigenous politics in different ways, or even thinking of Facebook outside of being a demon. There are a couple photos of the Facebook demon floating around. So maybe as one general question is, if there is any power of the imagination in constructing these sorts of identities that maybe people don't come into contact with every day, and how that influences the discourses that are being formed. And same thing with the TripAdvisor concept, like the TripAdvisor is advising people on how to do things, but it's also framing or constructing people's experiences and what they're looking for, if that makes sense.
I just talk. No. There we go.
We have to use
Are you gonna step?
Wait,
Okay, how's that? A little better. I just want to feedback, so thank you for the question. Closer even? Yes. Go up, swollen. Okay. I was thinking the same thing when these two were speaking. It's imagining a cultural force. It's also imaging it and taking up a kind of space. And I think you both spoke to that. Can I ask the question just back to you guys about, you started your paper talking about Black girls taking up space as a kind of safe space that they don't, that's not afforded to them in real public space. And then I think you hinted on it, but maybe didn't say it outright, kind of ways in which actually TripAdvisor itself can be used as a way to offset this privileged tourist perspective of this space. And so maybe if I can ask a question to you too, do you see counter narratives in, say, recommendations themselves, or do you see that space as one that can be critically used?
I'll just start by saying that let's use this one. I'm not sure about sort of counter movements, but I do see what I can see is increasingly what exists in this world. What I think I see inclusively is anxiety, and I think it's anxiety that can be productive. But I'm not prepared to say that it does counter all of the cultural imaginary that has accumulated from a long history.
So there's a counter narrative I have in one of my videos. It's one. So generally girls don't talk in videos. They use body language. But there's one where they do like a tour team where they build architecture like cheerleaders. And at the end they do shout outs. And they're like, shout out to Nene, shout out to Shana. And we know y'all don't like it. So we just do this for fun. We know y'all hate it. But that's set against almost 43 million views with 60% of the content basically calling them prostitutes. Those views is like 600 Superdomes at full seating capacity in New Orleans in the bedrooms of 1,000 girls. So it's shaping and imagining for non-Black people how we're supposed to live in Black place.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
Use that mic.
Yeah.
This mic.
Use this mic and then I'll run back.
Can you hear me? Yeah? I found all this panel really fascinating. So many questions part of it is public information because people don't know about Aboriginal history. But how do you manage that inside and out stuff?
In the particular situation that I was analyzing, there was already this very extensive repertoire for either selecting a certain speech style or selecting a certain language, right? But the way he operates in that space as a way to select who the audience is, right? Not only because you need to have an understanding of grammar to participate, right? But also its particular kinds of genres, which means you have to have a set of cultural references and local knowledge to hold the message, even if you understand the grammar. So these are ways in which people who speak manage like who the audience is and how far this thing can circulate. But at the same time, it's kind of like a flexible boundary because you can enter into the community by acquiring the kind of communicative competence that you would need to understand the message, right? So it's not like firm boundary, it's kind of negotiated.
One thing is, just like we're having to negotiate this space right now with the sound, it's hard when whoever's dominant has the space. Like, I'm really interested in like, cognitive, environmental, ecological issues that during adolescence is shaping the way you listen for. And if the dominant thing is, we know y'all hate, and I shut you out, then my learning to cooperate with the